Hello and welcome to this episode of Mind Your Business. Today we are joined by Martin Newman. Martin, please introduce yourself to the audience.
Hello, I'm Martin Newman. Pleased to be here and I hope you enjoy the conversation that I'm about to have.
Fantastic. So Martin, I always like to start the podcast off by just finding out a little bit more about each guest that we have on. And you and I have had a few conversations prior to this, but I think you've got a fantastic and very interesting story to tell, your backstory.
Thank you.
So, go back as far as you want, but just give us a little bit more of a meat on the bone as to sort of what you've been up to over the last sort of your career.
Yes, of course. Well, I was actually born in London, so despite the Glaswegian accent, I was born down here, brought up in Glasgow, adopted by two amazing people who sadly no longer with us. And I spent my formative years in Glasgow. My first job, I left school at 16. I went to work for my father, who had a chain of optical practices. My dad was really an early version of Specsavers. He had five practices, but he also had his own glazing workshop. So he would take in not only jobs from his own practices, but from other opticians in the area. And I did customer service, marketing, and customer experience for my dad for a number of years. Then I did a slightly sort of left of centre move and I went to work for a well-known young person's holiday company called Club 1830.
Yes.
I was in a bit of a tempestuous relationship at the time. Thought it might be a good idea to maybe leave the country, go and do something different, which I did. I went really initially for one summer thinking I'll just go and have a good laugh, but actually I really enjoyed it. I liked the environment and I've always been very ambitious, and so I said to my boss at the end of my first summer, what do I do to get promoted?
Yeah.
And what do I do to get ski work next year? Because I didn't get ski work at the end of my first summer. And he said, well, maybe you could go and learn a language. And so I did, and I started learning Spanish and German, and subsequently had quite a few promotions and ended up looking after a chunk of the Canary Islands basically, and all the resorts around there. And then, Club 1830 was part of a bigger group called the International Leisure Group that went bust. And although Club 1830 was refounded and I was given the opportunity to continue my career there, I just felt I'd kind of had enough. So I came back to Glasgow. I went into advertising for a while, selling advertising space, then working in the media, in the advertising agency world. I met a company called Sports Connection, who became one of my clients, who I would subsequently go to work for a few years later. But in between, I landed a job with Intersport, who some people might have heard of, and I became their marketing director. So I went from Intersport to Sports Connection. And when I was at Sports Connection, I had my first foray into the web. I had never used a computer. I'd never even switched one on. I didn't know how to type or do anything. I was a bit of a Luddite. I had a PA called Louise, and Louise was working on a document for me one day. And I said to her, show me this doc, where is it? As I stuck my head out the door, I could see that she was on the web.
Yeah.
And I said, show me the web, I've heard about this thing. And while you're doing that, maybe you can show me how to switch on this big box on my desk called a computer, how to send an email, and just become a bit more self-sufficient. But my instinct, my gut, I've learned to trust my gut a bit more as I get older, but my gut told me at that time that the web was going to be the future, and I thought I need to throw myself into this. And within a year, I both launched one of the first transactional websites in the UK in the sports trade when I was at Sports Connection, and then I'd also launched my first business venture. So I created a company initially doing domain registration, hosting, and then eventually web design, web development. We were building fully e-commerce enabled websites. I'm a Celtic fan for my sins, about one of Celtic's first websites, transactional websites way back in 97, 98. And I just thought, if I need a website, everyone will need one. And that's really why I built this business. And we did really well for about 2 years. And then when the dot-com started to crash in 2000, 2001, sadly, not long after that, I had to pull the plug in the business in 2002 because all of our clients were divesting their interests and saying, well, no one's going to buy anything. No one's going to buy anything online, which I knew wasn't the case. But there was no real broadband penetration at that time. So the experience of going online was really painful for consumers. So I knew broadband was the thing that would change that, which is what started to happen from sort of 2003 onwards. Anyway, I lost my confidence. I thought, okay, I'm not an entrepreneur. I've tried that one. and failed, I'll go back to a career. There was really nothing in Glasgow at that time that was going to work for me. I'd always fancied coming and living and working in the big smoke where I was born. So I started applying for jobs down here. It took a couple of years because even although I got quite close a few times, every time I was on a shortlist, I was up against people that were living here. I had the perceived baggage of a family, having to relocate from Glasgow and so on. And eventually I landed a job at a big corner shop that some of you might have heard of called Harrods. And I came down to London to head up home shopping at Harrods. So I was looking after all the sales that took place outside of the store. So online sales, catalogue sales, anyone placing an order through the contact centre. And I subsequently went on to do the same job at a company called Pentland Brands, who are a multi-brand owner. They own Berghaus, Speedo, Kickers, a whole bunch of different brands. Then I was Burberry's first head of online, and latterly Ted Baker. And in all those roles, I was P&L accountable, but not fully responsible. And I got a bit bored of that because I thought, well, it's not fair that, you know, my job and my bonus and everything else relies on my ability to deliver the numbers that somebody else has told me I have to achieve. And yet I'm the only one really with the experience in the business to do that. But somebody else was always making decisions that kind of got in the way. So I wasn't really fully empowered to do my job to the best of my ability. And I made one bad move, and I went to work for this small hybrid management consultancy, sort of digital agency business called Conchango. And they had sold the company halfway through my notice period when I was still at Ted Baker. And I thought, that's probably not going to end up very, very well for me. And it didn't. And I went there and I got made redundant after 6 months. But I came out and I thought, you know, I've worked in Harrods and Burberry and Ted Baker and all these big brands, and they keep bringing in these management consultants like McKinsey, Deloitte, Accenture, PwC, and they all seem to have a very similar model, where they would hire, hire somebody with a brain much bigger than mine, a brain the size of a planet, from Oxford, Cambridge, Durham, or maybe Stanford in the States. But they had no real world experience. So I'd end up being the person in the business that's got this big document that the board spent a lot of money on. And I'm reading it, and it's interesting to read, but I get to the end of it and I think I've no idea what to do with this information. There wasn't really a plan of action, if you like. It wasn't practical, and it was often not contextualized for the needs of the business that I was in. And I just thought there must be a gap in the market for a business that's made up of people like me, a practitioner who's been there, done it, knows what works and knows what doesn't work. So I created a brand called Practicology. And I grew it over 10 years. And I went from me to 100 people, believe it or not. And I ended up with offices in London, Dubai, Hong Kong, Guangzhou in China, and Sydney and Melbourne in Australia. I speak fluent Australian. I've been there 28 times, which is ridiculous when you say it out loud. And I got lucky and we sold the company in 2018 to an American company called Pattern.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And then I went out on my own, and I've ever since built this kind of bit of a portfolio career, which is interesting, I think, when I explain what I do.
Absolutely. Please do.
So I talk about buckets. So I've got a board advisory bucket. I work with brands that sell products or services. I mean, I work across different industries, although my core kind of background is really the retail industry. I work with automotive brands. I've worked with Toyota recently. I work with travel companies. I've worked with Carnival Cruises, Love Holidays, you name it. I mean, I work across really any sector, not just businesses that are selling to consumers, but also businesses selling to other businesses. So I also spend quite a lot of time working with technology companies and other service providers, helping them think through how they might do a better job of how they position what they do and the problems they solve, and how they communicate that. And then if I really like what they do, I'll maybe try and get them in the room for a conversation with some of the brands in my network. So I'm an advisor to some of these companies. I very much like giving back. So I've got 5 things that I do pro bono. I chair the retail arm of the Scouts, which I've done for 6 years now. I'm on the board of a charity called In Kind Direct, which His Majesty King Charles is our patron. And we do a very important job, which is we're like an enabler for Procter & Gamble, Unilever, Kimberly-Clark to donate their products, and we get them into the hands of the charities around the UK who are needing to help so many people, obviously more than ever in this country. We do a lot around period poverty and hygiene poverty. So it's a very worthwhile cause indeed. And then I'm an ambassador for the Fashion Retail Academy, as you can clearly see. I'm an ambassador for a retail charity called the Retail Trust, and another retail-focused charity called Pennies. And then aside from that, I've written 3 books. The most recent is called ROI Reimagined, which is all about new ways of looking at return on investment and where we place our bets and how we make our decisions. That's not a bad broad brush of overview of, I guess, my background and what I do today.
Well, I mean, it's an amazing sort of, well, it's not even a story, it's your life, what you've been up to over the last few decades, and, you know, it's an amazing thing. And often is the case that when I have guests on the show, we often talk about the highs that we've all experienced, and it sounds like you've experienced some really, really good highs there. But one of the things I always like to ask is, you know, there's obviously been some challenges along the way as well, Martin, and it would be nice if you could maybe share some of those with our audience as well, please.
Sure. Well, I mean, the biggest challenge I faced in my career today, undoubtedly, was the failure of my first business venture. I mean, I had 10 people, we were doing really well, and then all of a sudden the internet started going the wrong way first time round. The gold rush, and everyone, as I say, all my clients started divesting their interest, and we ran out of money. And, you know, that business failure was very painful at the time, you know, from a I'll be honest, knock to one's ego. I questioned myself. I thought, which is why I said I genuinely thought, okay, I'm not an entrepreneur. This is probably not for me. I've got to go back and find a job. That's probably my path. But ultimately, the lessons learned, I mean, I really do believe, and I'm sure you've heard this from many people, but I really do believe that you learn a lot more from your failures than you do from your mistakes, which is probably why you asked the question, right? And I'd say that at that time, I guess, where did I go wrong? I mean, the industry went wrong fundamentally. I had a good business, but I got a bit ahead of myself. You know, I had a flashy Merc CLK with a registration plate, W66 for web, WWW for World Wide Web. And, you know, being in the Goldfish Bowl of Glasgow, people would come up to me and say, oh, here you've made millions. And this was just in the early stages of the business. And even then I thought, having that flashy car and the flashy number plate is probably not a good plan. So that probably bit me in the arse a few years down the line. But I got a bit ahead of myself also in terms of hiring too quickly, not being close enough to the cash flow, probably not being close enough to the clients and you know, their levels of satisfaction, if you like, with what we were delivering in terms of the services. So when I set up again a number of years later with Practicology, it's no surprise, I was laser focused on all those things. I didn't get ahead of myself. I didn't hire too quickly. I brought on a couple of partners early on because I'm a firm believer in surrounding myself with people who are better at what they do than I am. I've just always been good at making sure we're all going in the right and same direction of travel and staying focused on that, but ultimately recognizing I'm not good at everything, so how do I find people that can plug my weaknesses, if you like? So I did that well. I was much closer to the cash flow. I nested, so I put a lot of money away from the early projects and work that we did before we started hiring people. And even when we had to pivot in Brexit. When the Brexit vote was coming up, I must admit, being in the bubble of London, like a lot of people, I thought, we're probably not Brexiting. I'm sure we're remaining, excuse me, whereas lots of people outside of London felt differently. But I didn't see that, I didn't hear it, I wasn't exposed to that, so it came as a bit of a surprise. But you know, at the end of the day, that was the decision. But what I did do in the run up to that is my instinct told me, if that happens and we do end up leaving the EU, knowing retailers as I did, I thought the first thing they're going to do is they're going to pull up the drawbridges. They're going to stop spending money on advisors and consultants like my business Practicology. And I thought, well, we're going to have to make sure we avoid that potential risk. So we already started moving into other sectors. So we had clients in automotive, we had clients in, quite a lot of clients actually in FMCG and CPG. We were working with the Procter & Gamble's, the Unilevers, the Reckitt Benckiser's. And that meant that when the retailers did what I anticipated they would do in the event of the vote going that way, we had enough business to see us through.
Yeah.
So the reason why the business survived over the period that it did was because of the mistakes I'd made before and the lessons I'd taken for that and making the right decision the second time around. So I think that for me would have been certainly the most painful thing I've been through and the biggest learning for me in my career for sure.
Yeah, and you nailed it right at the beginning there when you said that you learn more from your failures than you do from your wins.
Absolutely.
So that's a great share. And talking of wins, I mean, what are you most proudest of? The things that you've done over the last 30, 40 years. What really stands out for you?
Well, the first thing, it sounds like a bit of a cliche, but the first thing I'm proudest of is my family, right? So
absolutely.
I'm a very family-orientated person. I've got a wife and 2 daughters and a female. I've got 4 women in my life because I've got my wife and 2 daughters and my dog called Lulu. So they're all the things that I'm genuinely the most proudest of. Aside from that, from a career perspective, I've done pretty well. It's taken me a while. I guess I think of myself, although it's funny actually, from a fitness point of view, I do look after myself. I just turned 60. I've got a lot of energy, as you can probably tell. I work out most days, and I'm probably more of a sprinter than a long distance runner. Yep. But in business, I'm more of a long distance runner than a sprinter. Yeah. It took me a lot longer to probably get where I wanted to get to than I may have anticipated or may have hoped. Yep. But I think I got there, and I think I've probably done a bit better. Yeah. The fact that it took longer and I had to go through some of that pain and more of the ups and downs than I would have anticipated. But I think the other thing I would say I'm proud of, I mean, I had the book launch for my latest book, ROI Reimagined, at Fortnum & Mason in London. Yep. The reason why I held it there is I just thought there's a business that's reinvented itself so many times over hundreds of years. I mean, most people don't realise probably Fortnum & Mason's been around since the 1700s, right? It's an incredible business. Yeah. And it's had to continually invent itself in order to maintain its relevance for that any given time. And it's a brilliant business, and I'm sure anyone that's listening and watching this will agree. When you go in there, it's like an Aladdin's cave. It's a great place to spend a bit of time if you've got a bit of spare time and you're in the West End. So I just thought it was relevant from a reinvention point of view with a lot of what I talk about in my book. And people have often said to me that they admire me how I keep reinventing myself. I don't actually see it as that. I think everything I've done is an evolution. Yep. And I feel like I've always built on what I've done before, and I've taken what I've done before and worked out how to do it a bit better, how to become a bit smarter and avoid making some of those mistakes. But the reason for telling you about the book launch of Fortnum & Mason, I had 120 people at that launch, and the majority, well, I'd say 95% of them were there for me. Yeah. And people said, I mean, the amount of goodwill that was generated in terms of people posting about it on LinkedIn and a picture of themselves of the book. And these were some really, quite senior people in the retail industry and other sectors. And the feeling of goodwill, I mean, people said, it was like a who's who of retail, and I felt, I was very emotional about that. Yeah. Because I really believe they were there for me, and I think that's because I'm a good person, I'm a good human. I spend a lot of my time also trying to help people. I give a lot of career advice. I don't put the clock on. I don't charge people. I just try to be helpful. I do charge people for the services and the work that I do. But when I'm just giving advice to people, I'm just trying to be a critical friend or a helpful friend. And I'll often talk to people about where they are in their career and what they might do next, or if they're having a problem in the job that they've got at the moment, how might they tackle that? And sometimes it's about politics in the business or whatever it is. And, I think that's a good way to be. I go to bed at night really quite content, and I'm not looking over my shoulder, and I'm not sleeping with one eye open because I've been a good human along the way. So I'd like to think that people not only think highly of me because of what I've done, but also think I'm a good person, and that I always try and give back to other people. Yeah, so I'm loving that. I'm absolutely loving that. Yeah. So Martin, I want to move on to what we call, this is now part of what we call the quick fire round. Sure. So the quick fire round is going to be a handful of questions. So the first one's going to be, what's the best piece of advice you've ever received? Crikey. Well, I guess probably when one person that I had a coach, not for very long. I actually didn't think he was very good, to be honest with you, but he did say one thing to me that absolutely changed things for me, I think, at the time and in the future. Maybe I didn't realise it at that moment. Because I said to him, I was thinking of writing a book about customer centricity, which is the thread that's run through my whole career, and I've always been focused on that. And he said, just do it. He said, I had just started building practicology at the time, so it was quite early. And I didn't do it initially, but it was the seed that led to me writing the book. Because he said to me, he said, even if you never sell a single copy, no one will ever know. But you're building a management consultancy, and the credibility you'll get from writing a book will really serve you and will serve you very well, and it certainly went on to do that. And it served me extremely well as well. I mean, I sat on quite a few boards in the retail industry at the time. I was on the board of Light Stuff, I was on the board of a company called Conviviality, and there's no question that some of these opportunities have come off the back of things like writing books, because ultimately it does give you, it builds on your credibility, and it kind of underpins your knowledge at the end of the day. So that was pretty powerful.
Yeah, no, that's great. And obviously, talking of books, I know you've written 3. But we often ask the question, what books do you recommend, or book do you recommend, or podcast, or both?
One of the best books that the podcast that I would recommend, apart from this one, of course, is one called The Great Retail Debate, which is one I have with a guy called David Boynton, who has been CEO of The Body Shop, L'Occitane, Charles Tyrwhitt. He's currently managing director for Northern Europe from Pandora. But David and I we're very similar. We do disagree on some stuff, which makes it an interesting conversation. So I think The Great Retail Debate, if you're interested in hearing about the retail sector, David and I chew the fat on that. But from a book perspective, one of my favourite ever books is called Shoe Dog, written by Phil Knight, who's the founder of Nike.
Brilliant book.
It's a great book. And I guess if I were talking to Phil Knight today, it talks a lot about his perseverance and just some of the stuff that he had, the pivots that he had to do, many of them. Remarkable how close Nike came to failing so many times in the early stages. And if he were sitting here today, I would strongly advise him to go back and read his book again, because Nike's lost its way. And it's lost its way. They brought in a management consultant to run the business a few years ago, and the first thing he did is fire a significant number of people who'd been there for like 30 years or longer. And I think what happened is the DNA, the thing that made Nike the secret sauce, was in the people. And so many of them left the business. They really lost their way, and their market cap and their share price is down 55-60% on where it was 5 years ago. So if you're a shareholder of Nike, you'd be pretty hacked off. So he probably needs to go back to what made them successful in the early stages. But it's a brilliant book. The minute I picked it up, I took it on holiday one year, and I literally couldn't stop reading. I think I read it in about 2 days, which is unusual for me.
No, that is a great book. That is a great book. Tools. What tool do you currently use in life, in business, that you couldn't live without?
I'm sorry to say, and everyone will have heard so much about AI over the last couple of years, but I could not live without ChatGPT. ChatGPT has become, my marketing department, my analytics department, my business intelligence department, because, it's such a great tool to, analyze documents. I produce proposals in there for work that I'm looking to do. It just does so many great things for me. And it really is. It's like having sort of 7 or 8 people working alongside me, supporting me. Now, obviously, you've got to sense check everything, and I very much do. So I never take verbatim what it gives me. In the early stages of it, when I started using it a couple of years ago, you probably heard about AI hallucinating. It would sometimes occasionally spew out some very spurious facts and information that I thought, where did you get that from? Even I knew that wasn't right. But I think I'd say with a degree of confidence today that very rarely happens, and it's evolving at such a pace that it's just ridiculous how quickly it will produce something. So I couldn't do the breadth of what I do today. I genuinely couldn't without having that as a tool. I'd have to employ probably quite a few people to do that work. Now, in an ideal world, I would do that, right? But I guess I've got that tool there. It's not like I'm trying to save money. It's as I've evolved as a one-man band now, having been someone that ran a business with 100 people, I've just found it a really helpful tool to help me scale and broaden what I do without necessarily having to take the risk. Because I don't really want to build another business. I'm not really, I've kind of been there, done that. I'm not looking to do that now. So I quite like being a one-man band, I guess, to some extent. But having that there to help support me with these things has been pretty invaluable, you know. Yeah,
it's a phenomenal tool, and it's probably been one of the top answers when I've asked that question. So final question, a bit of a curveball. I'm a bit of an 80s fan, born in the 70s, raised in the 80s, and one of my favourite films, well, I've got many, but one of them is Back to the Future. And in that film, there was a vehicle that had a flux capacitor, and it enabled people to be able to go back in time. So one of the questions I love asking is, if we were able to jump into the DeLorean, the flux capacitor's kicking in, we're hitting 88 miles an hour, and we're going to go back in time, and we're going to go back in time, Martin, to when you was 18 years old. And you get to have a conversation with yourself, but the one thing that you really need to focus on is you're allowed to give yourself one piece of advice. And it can't be buy shares in Google or anything like that, which some people have said. What would that one piece of advice be that you would give your 18-year-old self?
I would probably tell myself not to overthink and just enjoy the ride. Because ultimately, like I said, I'm a long distance runner. I got there. It didn't happen as quickly as I thought it might when you're younger. You know, you kind of have these goals in your head, you know, I'm going to be retired when I'm 35, or I'll be a millionaire by the time I'm 40, and blah, 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 right? You know, I just think, you know, sometimes you need to let life take its course. I think the other thing I would say, which is the piece of advice that I give to people all the time, is this might sound slightly contradictory. On one hand, not to get too far ahead of yourself and overthink things. But on the other hand, when you are thinking about your career, we often take jobs without thinking about where it's going to take us in 5 years' time. And we take jobs for the here and now. Sometimes we take it for the money. Sometimes we take it for the job title. Sometimes we take it because of the brand, or whatever it is. But we often, more often than not, don't think about, we take this job today. What does that mean for us in 3 to 5 years' time? And that's really important, because you can end up going down a path that you didn't necessarily want to go down, or you might find it ends up closing off some of the other opportunities that you maybe envisioned, you know, you might have, you know, somewhere down the line. So those would be two things. I'm going to be greedy, and I'm going to give a third. I'm going to show you a picture after the podcast. I don't know whether you want to include it or not, but it's a great picture of me as a 17, 18-year-old. And if you look at it, you'll see I was a fully blown new romantic. And I often have this in my keynote presentations when I'm doing these presentations here and around the world. And I look as if I've just been plucked out of Spandau Ballet. And I've had my time again. I would have been in Spandau Ballet. And I used to bunk off school, literally as a 16-year-old, and come down to London I didn't do it very often, but I did it a few times. And I went to Steve Strange's New Romantic Night at the Camden Palais. And I was so into that era. I had the baggy Bowie trousers, the frilly shirts, the tucker boots, the sort of raincoat with the belt. I had eyeliner, my hair almost shaved up one side and long down here. I looked a bit like Phil Oakey out the Human League. But I loved that era. That was one of the favourite eras of my life. I really loved it, and I think if I had the chance to go and live another period in time, which I thought you were almost going to ask me, I would have probably jettisoned back to that period.
Love that.
But instead of just being part of that, I would have, or being somebody on the sidelines. I think I would have thrown myself into it more and probably tried to join a band and get more deeply involved.
I'll definitely be having a look at that picture after the podcast. Thanks, Martin. So. Okay, we're going to move on to sort of wrapping the podcast up now. But before we do that, I've just got one final question for you, which is, you've obviously been working very hard, travelling around. You was recently over in, was it Mumbai?
Yeah, Mumbai,
celebrating your 60th birthday. And you've written 3 books now. So what's next?
It's a good question. I don't want to retire, because I do worry about what the impact of that would be on the old grey matter. And I do largely enjoy, I'll enjoy 95% of what I do. Maybe what's next is I'll cut out the 5% that I don't enjoy or sometimes frustrates me. But I'm about to embark on an interesting piece of work. Well, I can't say who it is, but it's a manufacturing business, a big global manufacturing business. And it's going to take me to a number of different markets. They want to become customer centric. They don't sell directly to the consumer. So they manufacture products for other companies that sell to the consumer. Yep. So it's a slightly different challenge for me in that sense, which is what I like. Yep. I get driven because I don't have anyone who's telling me every day, you need to do more of this, you need to do more of that. Yeah. I've got to kind of force myself to do that. So I'm always thinking about how can I upskill myself, what might I do that I haven't done before that could be interesting. And because I'm reasonably well known now within my industry, I do get more and more opportunities, sometimes a bit left to centre like this one, that come to me. And I think that's going to be quite interesting. And I've got a few other interesting conversations on the go, one with a travel company and just other bits and bobs. I mean, I plan to keep going. I plan to keep the portfolio going that I spoke about earlier. Yep. Maybe I'll shed some of what I do that doesn't serve me anymore and I'll replace it with other things. But for me, as long as I'm doing interesting work with good people and I feel I'm making a difference, I mean, I call myself the consumer champion. So I'm trying to be a force for positive change for consumers, but also for the businesses that are serving those people, right? For serving us as consumers. So I'm kind of sitting in the middle there. I'm not Martin Lewis. I'm not only about the consumer. I'm actually trying to help the organisations understand how they could do a better job of engaging with their customers. And as long as I can keep doing that, work with good people and enjoy what I'm doing, I'll keep doing it for as long as I can, and I'll try and stay healthy along the way as well. Yeah,
that's fantastic. Well, Martin, I could sit here and chat with you for another hour or so, but unfortunately, time's getting the better of us. So the audience and the listeners and the viewers are going to want to find out a little bit more about you. What's going to be the best way for them to do that?
Sure. Well, you can, if you're on LinkedIn and you put in Martin Newman, hopefully I'll come out top. There are a surprising number of Martin Newmans actually, as I discovered. But I should come out top, and if not, you'll find me anyway. I do look a bit like this, so it's not a picture from 30 years ago like some people have on there. Yes. I do look like myself. You can come to my website, which is www.martinnewman.co.uk, or if you have a burning question and you want to send me something, you can email me martin@martinnewman.co.uk. Those are the three best ways: LinkedIn, my website, martinnewman.co.uk, or martin@martinnewman.co.uk.
Fantastic. Martin, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
And to our audience, that's a wrap. So you've just watched another episode of Mind Your Business, and please join us again soon. Take care. Bye for now.